The sound of whispers rippled through Genoa, Nebraska like wildfire on a dry summer day as Abigail Vance hurried along the dusty Main Street, her calico skirt pulled tight around her noticeably swelling belly. Spring of 1875 had brought new life to the frontier town, green buds on trees, wildflowers on the prairie, and unmistakable evidence of the secret Abigail could no longer hide beneath her loosened corsets and carefully draped shawls. "There she goes again," Martha Wilkins hissed from the mercantile porch, making no effort to lower her voice as Abigail passed. "Carrying a bastard child and parading around like she's got nothing to be ashamed of." Abigail kept her eyes fixed forward, pretending not to hear the cutting remarks that had become her daily torment since her condition had become apparent. 6 months ago, she'd been the schoolteacher everyone respected, the educated woman from back east who'd come west seeking independence and adventure. Now, at 23, she was the town scandal. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly. 4 months along now, and every day the evidence of her sin became more difficult to conceal. Not that concealment mattered anymore. Everyone knew. "Miss Vance," Sheriff Miller's voice called out from across the street. "Got a minute?" Abigail paused, drawing a deep breath before turning to face the silver-haired lawman. At least Sheriff Miller had always been civil, even after the rumors began. "Good morning, Sheriff," she said, forcing a smile as he approached. "Town council meeting tonight," he said, his weathered face serious beneath his mustache. "They'll be discussing your situation. Thought you should know." The blood drained from Abigail's face. "My situation?" "The school board's concerned about having an unmarried woman in your condition teaching the children." He shifted uncomfortably. "Some parents have complained." Abigail squared her shoulders, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. "I see. And will I be permitted to speak in my own defense?" The sheriff's eyes softened with something like pity. 7 o'clock at the town hall. Can't promise it'll make a difference, but you should be there." "Thank you for the warning," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the panic rising inside her. Teaching was everything. It was her livelihood, her purpose, her only means of supporting herself and soon her child. As Sheriff Miller tipped his hat and walked away, Abigail continued toward the small, whitewashed schoolhouse at the edge of town. She'd arrived early as always, needing time to prepare the day's lessons before her students arrived. The familiar routine helped calm her fraying nerves. She was arranging primers on the children's desks when she heard the door creak open behind her. "Miss Vance." She turned to find 10-year-old Lucy Peterson standing in the doorway, her blonde braids hanging over her shoulders, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Good morning, Lucy. You're early today." The girl nodded, stepping inside. "Mama says I'm not supposed to talk to you anymore." She blurted out the words, then bit her lip. "She says you're indecent." The word stung like a physical blow. Abigail kneeled before the child, meeting her eyes. "And what do you think, Lucy?" The girl's brow furrowed. "I think you're the best teacher we've ever had." "And Tommy Peterson says babies are just gifts from God, so I don't understand why everyone's so angry about yours." A lump formed in Abigail's throat. "Thank you, Lucy. That's very kind." "Is it true you're going to lose your job?" Lucy asked, her innocent question piercing Abigail's heart. Before she could answer, the schoolhouse door burst open again, and Meredith Peterson, Lucy's mother, stood framed in the doorway, her face flushed with anger. "Lucy, I told you to wait for me." She grabbed her daughter's arm, pulling her away from Abigail. "I don't want you near this woman." "Mrs. Peterson, please," Abigail began. "Save it," Meredith snapped. "The whole town knows what you are. Just because you came from back east with your fancy education doesn't mean you can corrupt our children with your loose ways." Lucy looked between her mother and teacher, confusion and distress evident on her young face. "I'm still the same person I've always been," Abigail said quietly. "Hardly," Meredith scoffed. "A respectable woman doesn't get herself in your condition. A decent woman would have left town in shame months ago. And where exactly would you suggest I go?" Abigail challenged, her patience finally breaking. "This is my home now. I have nowhere else. That's not our concern." Meredith turned to leave, dragging Lucy with her. "The council will handle this tonight. Mark my words, Miss Vance, you won't be teaching our children much longer." As the door slammed behind them, Abigail sank into her chair, trembling hands covering her face. She'd known this day would come. From the moment she'd realized she was with child, she'd known her time in Genoa was limited. But where could she go? How would she survive? The father of her child was long gone, having disappeared like morning mist after their brief encounter. She'd been a fool, believing his promises of marriage, of a future together. Her hand stroked her swelling belly. "It's just us now, little one," she whispered. "But I'll find a way, I promise." Throughout the day, students trickled in fewer than usual. Several children had been kept home, their parents unwilling to let them be taught by a fallen woman. Those who did attend cast curious glances at her midsection or avoided meeting her eyes altogether. Even the oldest students, usually eager to engage in debate and discussion, remained subdued. By 3 o'clock, when she dismissed the class, Abigail felt hollowed out with exhaustion. She gathered her books slowly, delaying her return to the small room she rented above the milliner's shop. Mrs. Hannigan, her landlady, had been dropping increasingly unsubtle hints that Abigail might need to find other accommodations soon. The spring air had turned cooler as clouds gathered overhead. Abigail pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped onto the dirt road leading back to town. She'd gone no more than 50 yards when she heard the approaching sound of horses, not the steady clip-clop of a single rider, but the thunder of many hooves pounding the earth. Rounding the bend came a trail-weary group of cowboys, their horses kicking up dust, their faces sun-bronzed and weathered beneath wide-brimmed hats. Abigail stepped aside to let them pass, keeping her eyes downcast, hoping to avoid notice. No such luck. The riders slowed, and one broke from the group, guiding his chestnut stallion toward her. "Afternoon, madam," came a deep voice, tinged with a southern drawl. Abigail looked up into startlingly blue eyes set in a face that might have been sculpted from the rugged Wyoming landscape itself. Handsome in a rough-hewn way, with several days' growth of beard shadowing a strong jaw and a small scar bisecting his left eyebrow. "Good afternoon," she replied stiffly, preparing herself for another confrontation. The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Ethan Barrett," he introduced himself. "Just rode in with a herd bound for the railroad at Grand Island. Was wondering if you might point us towards someplace a man could get a decent meal and maybe a bath in this town." Relief washed over her. He was just looking for directions, not looking to judge her. "The Golden Nugget serves good food," she offered. "And Mrs. Holloway runs a boarding house just beyond the church where you can get a bath and a clean bed for the night." Ethan Barrett's gaze lingered on her face a moment too long, and Abigail felt the blood rush to her cheeks. Then his eyes dipped lower, taking in her condition, and she stiffened, waiting for the familiar look of disgust or judgment to cloud his features. Instead, a faint smile touched his lips. "Much obliged, Miss Vance," she supplied cautiously. "Abigail Vance. Miss Vance," he nodded, replacing his hat. "Might be seeing you around town then. We'll be here a few days before moving on." She doubted it. Once he heard the town gossip, he'd avoid her like all the others. Enjoy your stay in Genoa, Mr. Barrett." He tipped his hat again before rejoining his companions, and they continued toward town at an unhurried pace. Abigail watched them go, feeling strangely unsettled by the encounter. It had been months since a man had looked at her with anything resembling respect, let alone the hint of admiration she thought she'd glimpsed in Ethan Barrett's eyes. "Don't be ridiculous," she muttered to herself as she resumed walking. He was being polite, nothing more. By the time Abigail reached town, the Cowboys had already disappeared into the Golden Nugget. She hurried past the saloon, ignoring the sideways glances from townsfolk, and climbed the narrow stairs to her rented room. The council meeting was in 3 hours. She had until then to decide whether to fight for her position, or accept the inevitable with what dignity she could muster. Abigail spent those hours pacing her small room, rehearsing arguments, crafting appeals to reason, compassion, Christian charity, anything that might sway the town council. But in her heart, she knew it was futile. The decision had likely been made weeks ago. At 6:45, she donned her best dress, a dark blue wool that still fit her changing figure, and pinned her hair into a severe bun. If they were going to judge her, let them at least see that she hadn't abandoned all propriety. The town hall was already crowded when she arrived, buzzing with barely hushed conversations that died abruptly as she entered. Heads turned. Eyes followed her progress to an empty chair near the back. No one offered a greeting or a smile. Mayor Tompkins called the meeting to order promptly at 7, clearing his throat importantly before addressing the gathered citizens. "As you all know, we've convened tonight to discuss a matter of community concern." His beady eyes found Abigail. "The continued employment of Miss Vance as our schoolteacher, given her compromised moral standing." Whispers erupted around the room. Abigail sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, her face a careful mask of composure. "I move that we terminate her contract immediately," called out Jasper Wilkins, the mercantile owner whose wife had been among Abigail's most vocal critics. "Can't have someone in her state influencing impressionable young minds." "Seconded," came another voice. "Now see here," Sheriff Miller interjected, rising from his chair. "The lady deserves a chance to speak her piece before we start voting on her future." Mayor Tompkins looked annoyed but nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Miss Vance, you may address the council." Abigail stood, feeling every eye in the room boring into her. She'd prepared an eloquent defense, but now, facing the sea of hostile faces, the carefully crafted words seemed to evaporate from her mind. She began, her voice faltering before she steadied it. "I came to Genoa nearly 2 years ago because I believed in the promise of this place, a community building something new on the frontier, where a person might be judged by their character and contributions rather than their past or their circumstances." A derisive snort came from somewhere in the crowd, but Abigail pressed on. "I have devoted myself to educating your children. I have stayed late helping struggling students, visited sick pupils in their homes, and spent my own meager salary on books and supplies when the school budget fell short." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Some looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "Yes, I am with child and unmarried. I made a mistake, trusted someone I shouldn't have. But this mistake does not erase my abilities as a teacher or my dedication to my students. If I am removed from my position, the children will suffer most of all." "What about the example you're setting?" demanded Mrs. Peterson, rising from her seat. "Teaching our daughters that there are no consequences for immoral behavior." "I hardly think losing my reputation, my standing in the community, and likely my home constitutes no consequences," Abigail replied with quiet dignity. But I would argue that showing compassion to someone who has erred might be a more valuable lesson for your children than casting her out. The room erupted in heated discussion, voices overlapping as townspeople argued back and forth. Some seemed swayed by her words, others more entrenched in their condemnation. Then, unexpectedly, the town hall doors swung open, and a hush fell over the crowd as Ethan Barrett stepped inside, followed by two of his fellow cowboys. His eyes quickly found Abigail, and she read confusion in them as he took in the scene. "What's all this?" he asked, his deep voice carrying easily in the suddenly silent room. Mayor Tompkins cleared his throat. "This is a town meeting, sir. Private business." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, making no move to leave. "Sounds to me like you're putting this lady on trial." Couldn't help overhearing some of it from outside. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy," Jasper Wilkins said dismissively. "Move along." "Maybe it should concern everyone when a community turns against one of its own," Ethan replied, his voice mild but his eyes hard. "Especially when that someone's in need of support rather than judgment." Abigail stared at him, astonished. Why was this stranger defending her? "You don't understand the situation," Mayor Tompkins said stiffly. "Miss Vance has violated the moral clause in her teaching contract. She's with child, unmarried, setting an unacceptable example. Is that right?" Ethan interrupted, pushing away from the doorframe and walking into the room. His spurs jingled softly with each deliberate step until he stood beside Abigail. He turned to face the assembly, his expression unreadable. "Then I reckon I should clear something up." The room held its collective breath. Abigail looked up at him, bewildered. "That baby she's carrying, it's mine." Gasps echoed through the town hall. Abigail's jaw dropped in shock. The stranger, this man she'd met barely hours ago, had just claimed paternity of her child. "What?" she whispered, but Ethan didn't look at her. "I met Miss Vance last year when passing through," he continued smoothly, addressing the stunned council members. "We had an understanding. I promised I'd come back after the cattle drive up north, make things right. Took longer than expected, ran into trouble with rustlers in Wyoming, then got delayed by early snows." He turned to Abigail then, and the intensity in his blue eyes silenced any protest she might have made. "I'm sorry it took so long, Abby, but I'm here now like I promised. You're carrying my future in there." The room erupted again, voices clamoring as people tried to make sense of this new development. "That true, Miss Vance?" Sheriff Miller asked skeptically. Before she could respond, Ethan took her hand in his. The warmth of his calloused fingers against her skin sent an unexpected jolt through her. "She didn't want to name me till I came back proper," he said. "Didn't want to shame me if something happened on the trail. That's the kind of woman she is, thinking of others before herself." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "But I'm back now, and I aim to marry her if she'll have me." Abigail's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone in the room must hear it. This was madness. She should expose the lie immediately. Yet something in Ethan's steadfast gaze made her hesitate. And in that moment of hesitation, she realized he was offering her a lifeline, a way to salvage her reputation, keep her position, her home, her future. But at what cost? And why would this stranger do such a thing? "Well, this changes matters considerably," Mayor Tompkins said, clearly flustered. "If there's to be a wedding—" "Hold on," Mrs. Peterson interrupted. "How do we know he's telling the truth? He just rode into town today. Convenient timing, if you ask me." Ethan's expression didn't waver. "Ask her," he said simply. "Ask Abigail if I'm the father of her child." Every eye in the room turned to her. Abigail felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders, to lie before the entire town, before God himself. But what choice did she have? return to her parents in Boston in disgrace, become destitute on the frontier with a newborn, or accept this unexpected salvation, however temporary it might prove to be. She raised her chin and met the expectant gazes of the town council. "Mr. Barrett speaks the truth," she said clearly. "He is the father of my child." The reaction was immediate, more gasps, whispers, exclamations of surprise. Through it all, Ethan's hand remained steady around hers. "Well then," Mayor Tompkins huffed, clearly disappointed at being deprived of his moral crusade. "I suppose that puts a different light on things. When do you intend to marry?" "As soon as possible," Ethan replied. "We've waited long enough." "Sunday after church," suggested Reverend Wallace, speaking up for the first time. "That gives you 3 days to prepare." Abigail felt lightheaded. This was happening too fast, spiraling beyond her control. Sunday would be perfect, Reverend," Ethan said. "Thank you." "Then I move we table the discussion of Miss Vance's employment until after the wedding," Sheriff Miller said. "Seems only fair to give the young couple a chance to make things right." "Seconded," called several voices. Mayor Tompkins looked around the room, seeing the wind had shifted. "Very well. Motion carried. Meeting adjourned." As people began filing out, many casting curious glances at the unexpected couple, Ethan leaned down to whisper in Abigail's ear, "We should talk, privately." She nodded numbly, unable to form words. He guided her through the crowd, his hand at the small of her back, playing the part of the devoted father to be perfectly. Outside, the evening air had cooled further, and a few stars had begun to appear in the darkening sky. "There's a bench behind the church," she managed to say. "No one will disturb us there." They walked in silence, maintaining a respectable distance now that they were away from prying eyes. When they reached the secluded bench, Abigail turned to face her supposed fiancé. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Ethan removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Couldn't stand by and watch them crucify you," he said simply. "Reminded me too much of something that happened to my sister years back." "Your sister?" he nodded, his expression somber. "Catherine found herself in a similar situation. Man who promised to marry her disappeared when he found out she was expecting. Town turned against her, drove her out. She tried to make it on her own." His voice trailed off, pain etching lines around his eyes. "Lost both her and the baby in the end." Abigail's anger softened. "I'm so sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, though his voice suggested the wound remained fresh. "When I heard what they were saying about you and saw how they were treating you, I couldn't just ride away. Not again. So you decided to claim my child as your own." She shook her head in disbelief. "Do you realize what you've done? You've tied yourself to a complete stranger." "Only until the baby comes," he said reasonably. "After that, I could meet with an unfortunate accident, or we could quietly divorce once the scandal dies down. You'd be the respectable widow or divorcee with a legitimate child, free to live your life without shame." Abigail stared at him, astounded by his casual planning of such deception. "And in the meantime, we're to be married in 3 days, Mr. Barrett. The whole town will expect us to live as husband and wife." A hint of color rose in his tanned cheeks. "I meant what I said about making things right, Miss Vance, but I'd never impose on you in that way. We can share a home, keep up appearances, but you have my word as a gentleman that I'll respect your privacy and your virtue." "My virtue," she repeated with a bitter laugh. "I think that ship has sailed, Mr. Barrett, or have you forgotten the evidence growing beneath my heart?" His eyes dropped briefly to her rounded belly before meeting her gaze again. "I meant no offense." Abigail sighed, suddenly exhausted. "No, I'm the one who should apologize. You've shown me extraordinary kindness, and I'm being ungrateful." She studied his face in the fading light. "But I still don't understand. Even with your sister's tragedy, why would you sacrifice so much for a woman you just met?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Because I know what it's like to face the world alone," he finally said. "Been doing it since I was 16, and maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe I'm tired of being alone." The vulnerability in his admission caught her off guard. There was more to this cowboy than she'd initially assumed. "What about your work?" she asked. "You said you were moving on in a few days with your herd." "The other boys can manage without me. The trail boss owes me back wages anyway." He shrugged. "I've been thinking about settling down somewhere, trying my hand at something more permanent than driving cattle." "Might as well be here as anywhere." Abigail shook her head, still trying to make sense of it all. "And if I refuse your offer, if I tell everyone you lied, then I'll ride out tomorrow and you'll face whatever comes. That's your choice, of course." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "But I meant what I said in there. That baby you're carrying, it could be my future too. A chance to do something right, to be part of a family again, even if it's just for show." The longing in his voice struck a chord within her. Wasn't that what she wanted too? Not to face motherhood alone. "It wouldn't be real," she said softly. "Maybe not at first," he conceded. "But who knows what might grow between two people given time and shared purpose." A shiver that had nothing to do with the cooling air ran through her. There was something compelling about Ethan Barrett and honesty beneath his deception that paradoxically made her want to trust him. "If I agree to this madness," she said slowly, "there would have to be rules, boundaries." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Name them." "You would have no claim to my child. When we eventually part ways, the baby stays with me." He nodded. "Understood. And we would need a story, details about our supposed past together that will satisfy the town's curiosity." "We can work on that tonight," he agreed. "Where will you stay until Sunday?" she asked practically. "Boarding house, I reckon." Abigail considered their situation. "People will talk if we're not seen together between now and the wedding. They'll suspect the truth." "Then I'll court you properly these next few days," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Bring you flowers, take you to dinner at the hotel, walk you home from school, the works." Despite herself, Abigail felt an answering smile form on her lips. "You've thought this through, haven't you?" "Not really," he admitted. "Been making it up as I go since I walked into that town hall, but I'm a quick thinker." She couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. "So it seems." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their impending charade settling between them. "I should probably know something about you," she finally said. "If we're to be married in 3 days." "Not much to tell," he replied. "Born in Virginia, family lost everything in the war. Started working cattle drives at 16. Been drifting ever since, Texas to Montana and everywhere in between." He glanced at her. "Your turn." "Boston born and raised," she said. "Father's a professor at Harvard, mother comes from old money but little sense. They expected me to marry well and host dinner parties for the rest of my life." "And instead you came west to teach in a frontier town," he observed. "Took courage, or foolishness," she said ruefully. "Depends on who you ask." "The father of your child," Ethan ventured carefully. "He really is gone." Abigail's expression hardened. "James Whitmore, a gentleman from Chicago who claimed to be surveying railroad routes, said all the right things, made all the right promises." Her hand drifted to her belly. "Once he got what he wanted, he disappeared in the night. Left a note saying he was already married with children back east." Anger flashed in Ethan's eyes. "Some men don't deserve the name." "No," she agreed softly. "They don't." The church bell tolled 8 o'clock, startling them both. Abigail rose from the bench. "It's getting late." I should return to my lodgings before Mrs. Hannigan locks the door. Ethan stood as well, settling his hat back on his head. May I walk you home? Seems like something a fiancé would do. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes, I suppose it does. They walked side by side through the quiet streets. Lights glowed in windows and occasionally a face appeared, watching their progress with undisguised curiosity. News traveled fast in Genoa. They're all watching, Abigail murmured. By morning, everyone will know. Good, Ethan said. Let them see us together. The more they believe our story, the better for you. When they reached the milliner's shop, Abigail paused at the side entrance that led to her room. This is where I live. For now, at least. We'll need to find a proper place before the wedding, Ethan said thoughtfully. Something befitting a schoolteacher and her husband. The word, husband, sent another shiver through her. In 3 days, this virtual stranger would be her husband in the eyes of the law and the community. The reality of it was beginning to sink in. This is madness, she whispered. Ethan's expression softened. Second thoughts. About 100 of them, she admitted. But what choice do I have? You always have a choice, Abigail, he said seriously. Say the word, and I'll ride out at first light. Tell everyone I got cold feet or that you came to your senses. She studied him in the dim light from the shop window. Why does it feel like you're the one offering me redemption when I'm the fallen woman and you're the honorable man? A sad smile touched his lips. Maybe we're all looking for redemption in one way or another. Before she could respond, the door behind her opened, revealing Mrs. Hannigan in her nightcap, a candle held aloft. Miss Vance. And Mr. Barrett, isn't it? Her eyes darted between them, naked curiosity on her face. I heard the most extraordinary rumor at the general store not half an hour ago. Ethan removed his hat. Evening, madam. I was just seeing Miss Vance home after the town meeting. So it's true then, Mrs. Hannigan pressed. You're the father of her child. You're to be married Sunday. Abigail tensed, but Ethan's calm voice replied, Yes, madam, that's correct. Been too long coming, I know, but I aim to make things right. Mrs. Hannigan's expression softened marginally. Well, that changes things considerably. She turned to Abigail. You might have said something sooner, dear. It was complicated, Abigail managed. The landlady didn't look entirely convinced. Well, I suppose you'll be wanting to keep your room until the wedding. After that, you'll be moving in with your husband, I assume. We'll be looking for a suitable home, Ethan confirmed before Abigail could respond. If you know of anything available to rent in town, we'd be obliged for the information. The old Cunningham place might be available, Mrs. Hannigan said thoughtfully. Just past the church. Nothing fancy, but it has 2 bedrooms and a decent kitchen. Been empty since the Cunninghams moved to Omaha last fall. Thank you, madam. We'll look into it tomorrow. Ethan turned to Abigail, his expression softening. Get some rest now. I'll call for you in the morning before school. The tenderness in his voice was so convincing that Abigail almost believed it herself. Good night, Mr. Barrett. He surprised her by taking her hand and bringing it briefly to his lips, a gesture both proper and oddly intimate. Good night, Abby. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Abigail's mind whirled with the day's extraordinary developments. By morning, her reputation would be at least partially restored. By Sunday, she would be a married woman. And her child, the source of so much shame and worry, would have a name, if not a true father, all because a stranger with kind eyes couldn't bear to see history repeat itself. Ethan Barrett was nothing like she'd imagined her husband would be. Not that this was a real marriage, she reminded herself firmly. It was an arrangement of convenience, a temporary solution to her predicament. So why did her hand still tingle where his lips had touched it? The next morning, Abigail woke to the sound of excited voices below her window. Peering out, she saw a small crowd gathered around Ethan, who stood holding a bouquet of wildflowers. He was freshly shaven, his dark hair slicked back, wearing a clean shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Her stomach fluttered, and she pressed a hand to it, unsure whether the sensation came from the baby or from nerves about the charade they were about to perform. She dressed carefully, selecting a pale green dress that somewhat disguised her condition, and pinned her auburn hair in a simple but flattering style. If she was to play the role of reunited sweetheart, she might as well look the part. When she descended the stairs, Ethan's eyes widened appreciatively. "Morning, Abby," he said, using the nickname with familiar ease. "Brought you these." He handed her the wildflowers with a smile that reached his eyes. "They're beautiful," she said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Thank you." "Thought I might walk you to school," he continued, "if that's all right." Around them, townspeople watched avidly, no doubt memorizing every detail to share later. "I would like that," she replied, slipping her hand into the crook of his offered arm. As they walked through town, Abigail was acutely aware of the changed atmosphere. Yesterday, eyes had followed her with judgment and contempt. Today, those same eyes held curiosity, surprise, and in some cases, a grudging respect. "Everyone's staring," she murmured. "Let them," Ethan said quietly. "Hold your head high. You've done nothing to be ashamed of." His unwavering support bolstered her confidence. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, Abigail felt almost like her old self again. "What will you do today?" she asked as they paused at the school steps. "Got some business to attend to," he replied. "Need to settle things with my trail boss, see about renting us a place to live, maybe look for work in town." "You'd stay in Genoa permanently?" she asked, surprised. He shrugged. "Why not?" "Seems like a decent town, despite recent evidence to the contrary." His blue eyes held hers. "Besides, we've got appearances to maintain at least until the baby comes." Children began arriving, watching the couple with undisguised curiosity. Among them was Lucy Peterson, who approached cautiously. "Miss Vance, is it true you're getting married on Sunday?" the girl asked. Abigail knelt to Lucy's level. "Yes, it's true. This is Mr. Barrett, my fiancé." Ethan tipped his hat to the child. "Pleased to meet you, miss." "Lucy Peterson," she supplied, studying him with a child's frank appraisal. "Are you really the daddy of Miss Vance's baby, Lucy?" Abigail gasped, but Ethan only chuckled. "Yes, madam, I am, and mighty proud of it, too." Lucy's face brightened. "I told Mama it wasn't anything bad. I said babies are gifts from God," and she got real quiet and wouldn't talk about it anymore. Ethan winked at the child. "Smart girl. You're absolutely right." More students arrived, gathering around to gawk at the mysterious cowboy who had claimed their teacher and her unborn child. "I should start class," Abigail said, suddenly self-conscious under the scrutiny. "I'll pick you up after," Ethan promised. "We can look at that house Mrs. Hannigan mentioned." He leaned in and, to her shock, placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, just lingering enough to be convincing but brief enough to be proper. "Have a good day, Abby." As he walked away, the children erupted in excited whispers. Abigail touched her cheek, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Inside, "Everyone," she called, her teacher's authority returning. "We have lessons to attend to." The school day passed in a blur. Students who had been absent the day before returned, their parents apparently satisfied that the moral crisis had been resolved. During the noon recess, several mothers who had previously avoided her stopped by with congratulations and offers of help with wedding preparations. The transformation was dizzying. Yesterday, she had been a fallen woman. Today, she was a bride-to-be, the subject of romance rather than scandal. When the final bell rang, Abigail found Ethan waiting outside as promised. She dismissed her students and joined him, noting his satisfied expression. "Good news?" she inquired as they began walking. "Several pieces," he confirmed. "First, the Cunningham house is ours if we want it. Rent's reasonable and it's in good condition. Second, the livery stable's looking for help. Old man Davis can't manage alone anymore. Third, I sent telegrams to a couple of friends who can verify our story if anyone gets too curious." Abigail blinked in surprise. "You've been busy." "Figured we should get our ducks in a row," he said. "Want to see the house?" The Cunningham place was indeed nothing fancy, as Mrs. Hannigan had said, but it was clean and solid. A small white clapboard structure with a front porch, 2 modest bedrooms, a kitchen with a good stove, and a cozy parlor. Simple furnishings remained from the previous occupants, who had apparently moved in haste. "It's perfect," Abigail said, running a hand over the kitchen table. "Much nicer than my room above the milliner's." "Needs a woman's touch," Ethan observed, "but it'll do nicely." They stood awkwardly in the center of what would soon be their shared home. The reality of their situation hung between them, the intimacy they would have to navigate, the boundaries they must establish. "I'll take the smaller bedroom," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "You and the baby should have the larger one." Abigail nodded gratefully. "Thank you for everything you're doing." "Don't thank me yet," he said with a wry smile. "Still got to get through a wedding and convince an entire town we're madly in love." "About that," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about our story, how we met, I mean. And you said you've been on cattle drives all over. Did you ever pass through Nebraska before?" He nodded. "Couple years back. Brought a herd through on the way to Cheyenne." "That would have been around the time I first arrived in Genoa," she said thoughtfully. "We could say we met then, began courting, and you promised to return when you'd saved enough to start a proper life together. Then I got delayed," Ethan continued, picking up the thread, "but we kept in touch through letters. When you realized you were expecting, you wrote to tell me, but the letter never reached me because I was in remote country. And I was too proud to tell anyone else," Abigail added. "I wanted to wait until you returned as promised. Which I finally did, only to find the town had turned against you." His blue eyes held a glimmer of admiration. "It's a good story, simple enough to remember, complicated enough to be believable. We should probably know some details about each other too," she suggested. "Things a courting couple would know." They spent the next hour exchanging personal histories, favorite foods, childhood memories, hopes and fears, until the lengthening shadows reminded them of the time. "I should get you back before dark," Ethan said, helping her to her feet. "Wouldn't want to give the gossips any more fuel." As they walked back toward town, they encountered Reverend Wallace heading in the opposite direction. "Ah, the happy couple," the minister greeted them. "I was just coming to find you. We need to discuss the details of Sunday's ceremony." "Of course, Reverend," Abigail said, hoping her nervousness wasn't apparent. "I understand this is somewhat accelerated," the minister said delicately. "But I believe in the sanctity of marriage and the importance of giving a child a name. That said, I expect this union to be entered into with sincerity and commitment, despite its hasty arrangement." His penetrating gaze made Abigail squirm. Did he suspect their deception? "I assure you, sir," Ethan said firmly, "my intentions toward Abigail and our child are entirely honorable. I mean to be a good husband and father." The conviction in his voice almost convinced Abigail herself. Reverend Wallace seemed satisfied, nodding approvingly. "Very well. We'll proceed with the ceremony after Sunday service. Mrs. Wallace insists on hosting a small reception afterward at the parsonage." "That's very kind," Abigail said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Marriage is a sacred covenant, the minister reminded them, not to be entered into lightly or with reservation. I trust you both understand the gravity of the vows you'll be taking. Yes, Reverend, they answered in unison. As the minister continued toward his home, Abigail felt the weight of their deception grow heavier. They would be standing before God, making promises neither intended to keep. Having second thoughts, Ethan asked softly, reading her troubled expression. It's just, lying before God seems worse somehow than lying to the townspeople, she admitted. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Maybe we don't have to lie, he finally said. Maybe we just have to mean the vows differently than most couples do. She looked at him quizzically. What do you mean? Well, when I promise to protect and provide for you, I can mean it for as long as our arrangement lasts. When you promise to respect me, you can mean it in the same way. We may not be promising forever, but we can be honest about the time we do have. His perspective eased her conscience somewhat. I hadn't thought of it that way. Besides, he added with a hint of mischief, didn't Jesus himself say something about not judging others? Seems to me the good people of Genoa could use that reminder. Despite herself, Abigail laughed. I'm not sure that's exactly the right interpretation of Scripture, Mr. Barrett. Ethan, he corrected gently. If we're to be married in 2 days, you might as well use my given name. Ethan, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt strangely right. The next day passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Word had spread quickly, and the women of Genoa, many of whom had shunned Abigail just days before now, rallied around the expectant bride with offers of help and wedding gifts. The transformation was dizzying. Mrs. Holloway from the boarding house presented Abigail with a beautiful cream-colored dress that had belonged to her daughter. She's in Kansas City now, married a banker. This was her going-away dress, but I think it'll suit you just fine with a few alterations to accommodate your condition. Even Mrs. Peterson arrived at the schoolhouse after classes with a hand-stitched baby blanket. Lucy insisted, she explained stiffly, but Abigail detected a softening in the woman's demeanor. Ethan, meanwhile, had been busy establishing himself in town. He'd taken the job at the livery stable, rented their house, and purchased a simple gold band from the jeweler. He'd also acquired a respectable suit for the wedding and begun moving Abigail's few possessions from her rented room to their new home. By Saturday evening, everything was in place for the following day's ceremony. Abigail sat on the porch of what would soon be her marital home, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and pink. Ethan joined her, settling into the adjacent rocking chair with a contented sigh. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. You, little bit, he conceded. Never thought I'd be getting married, especially not like this. You never wanted a family of your own? She asked curiously. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the darkening sky. Never stayed in one place long enough to consider it seriously, he finally said. And after what happened to Catherine, well, I guess I've been wary of getting too close to anyone. And now you're marrying a complete stranger, Abigail observed wryly. A smile tugged at his lips. Not a complete stranger anymore. I know you take honey in your tea, you're afraid of thunderstorms, and you once let a mouse loose in your father's study because he forbade you from reading his scientific journals. She laughed, surprised he remembered that detail from their conversation. And I know you can't whistle. You're partial to apple pie over peach, and you once rode 3 days with a broken arm because you were too stubborn to admit you were hurt. Their eyes met in the fading light, a current of understanding passing between them. Over the past few days, they had indeed moved beyond strangers to something approaching friendship. We should probably head back to town, Ethan said reluctantly. Wouldn't be proper for us to be alone out here after dark, even if we are getting married tomorrow." As they walked back toward town, their hands occasionally brushing, Abigail found herself wondering what it would be like if their marriage were real, if the tender looks Ethan gave her, when others were watching, reflected genuine feelings rather than calculated performance. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, interrupting her reverie. She blushed, grateful for the dim light. "Just thinking about tomorrow," she hedged. "Everything's happening so quickly." "Too quickly?" he asked, a note of concern in his voice. "No," she assured him. "It's just strange how life can change course so suddenly. A week ago, I was facing disgrace and destitution. Now I'm about to be a respectable married woman with a home and a secure future for my child. And a husband who's essentially a hired stand-in," he reminded her gently. "That's not how I think of you," she said honestly. "Whatever your reasons for helping me, I'm grateful, more than I can express." They had reached Mrs. Hannigan's shop. Ethan took her hands in his expression serious in the lamplight spilling from the window. "Get some sleep, Abby. Tomorrow's a big day." On impulse, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Ethan. I'll see you at the church." His eyes widened slightly at the unexpected gesture, but he recovered quickly, tipping his hat with a smile. "I'll be the nervous-looking fellow at the altar." Abigail slept fitfully that night, her mind churning with thoughts of the ceremony ahead and the strange new life that would follow. When dawn finally broke, she rose and bathed carefully before donning the cream-colored dress Mrs. Holloway had altered for her. The gentle empire waist flattered her changing figure, making her look elegantly maternal rather than scandalously unwed. Mrs. Hannigan helped arrange her hair, weaving wildflowers into the auburn tresses. "You make a lovely bride," the older woman said approvingly. "And that cowboy of yours seems a decent sort, bit rough around the edges, but he clearly cares for you." "Thank you," Abigail replied, wondering at the strange pang she felt at the landlady's misreading of their relationship. "He's a good man." The church was packed when Abigail arrived. It seemed the entire population of Genoa had turned out to witness the hasty wedding of their scandalous schoolteacher and her long-absent beau. She paused at the entrance, suddenly paralyzed by nerves. Sheriff Miller appeared at her elbow. "Thought you might need someone to give you away," he said kindly. "Unless you'd prefer to walk alone." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "I would be honored, Sheriff." As the organ began to play, Abigail took the lawman's arm. The congregation rose, turning to watch her progress down the aisle. But Abigail's eyes were fixed on Ethan, waiting for her at the altar. He looked transformed in his new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was the expression in his blue eyes as they found hers that made her breath catch a mixture of admiration, tenderness, and something deeper she couldn't name. When she reached him, Sheriff Miller placed her hand in Ethan's with a nod of approval. Ethan's fingers tightened around hers, warm and reassuring. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Wallace began, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company, to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Abigail as she stood beside Ethan, acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the steady strength of his hand holding hers. When the time came for their vows, Ethan's voice was clear and unwavering. "I, Ethan Barrett, take thee, Abigail Vance, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, according to God's holy ordinance. And thereto I pledge thee my faith." Abigail repeated the ancient promises, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. As she spoke of loving and cherishing Ethan until death, she felt a strange rightness in the words, despite knowing their arrangement was temporary. "The ring, please," Reverend Wallace prompted. Ethan produced the simple gold band, sliding it onto Abigail's finger as he repeated after the minister, "With this ring I thee wed, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow." "By the power vested in me," Reverend Wallace concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God hath joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled benevolently at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Barrett." A flutter of panic rose in Abigail's chest. They hadn't discussed this part of the ceremony. Would Ethan kiss her cheek as he had before? Would he merely brush his lips against hers for appearance's sake? Her questions were answered as Ethan gently cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes seeking permission. At her slight nod, he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was both achingly tender and strangely familiar, as if they had done this 100 times before. It lasted only a moment, but when he pulled away, Abigail felt permanently altered, as if something fundamental had shifted within her. The congregation broke into applause, many of the women dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Wallace announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Barrett." Hand in hand, they walked back down the aisle, now truly husband and wife in the eyes of God and the community of Genoa. The reception at the parsonage was a surprisingly joyful affair. The same townspeople who had been ready to run Abigail out of town days earlier now offered heartfelt congratulations and good wishes for the future. Several of the women fussed over her, offering advice on marriage and motherhood. "First babies are the hardest, Mrs. Davis confided, patting Abigail's belly. "But don't you worry, dear. We'll all help when the time comes." Throughout it all, Ethan remained at her side, his hand resting protectively at the small of her back, playing the role of devoted husband with a conviction that sometimes made Abigail forget it was just that, a role. As the afternoon waned, he leaned close to whisper, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Barrett?" The name sent a shiver through her. "Yes," she replied, surprised at how natural it felt to say it. "I think I am." They thanked their hosts and made their way through town toward their new home, accepting congratulations and well wishes along the way. Several young men called out good-natured ribald jokes to Ethan, who responded with appropriate embarrassment and pride. When they reached the Cunningham house, their house now, Ethan surprised her by sweeping her into his arms at the threshold. "What are you doing?" she gasped, clinging to his shoulders. "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he explained with a grin. "Tradition, you know." He managed the door with one hand and carried her inside, setting her gently on her feet in the center of their parlor. For a moment they stood awkwardly, the reality of their situation settling around them now that they were alone. "Well," Ethan said finally, "we did it." "Yes," Abigail agreed, twisting the new ring on her finger. "We certainly did. Are you hungry? I could fix us something for supper." She nodded, grateful for the mundane suggestion. "That would be nice. I'll help." They worked side by side in the small kitchen, preparing a simple meal of ham, biscuits, and beans. The domestic tableau felt strangely comfortable, as if they had done this many times before. Over supper, they discussed practical matters: Abigail's teaching schedule, Ethan's new job at the livery stable, the preparations they'd need to make for the baby's arrival in the coming months. "Dr. Simmons says early November," Abigail mentioned, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "Though first babies often come late, apparently." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We'll need a cradle and other baby things. I'm afraid I don't know much about what's required." "Mrs. Davis has offered to help," Abigail said, "and several of the other women as well." It's strange, a week ago they could barely look at me, and now they can't do enough to assist. People are fickle, Ethan observed, but at least they've come around. As they washed the dishes together afterward, Abigail found herself studying her new husband's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crookedness of his nose that suggested it had been broken at some point, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Is there something on my face?" he asked, catching her gaze. She blushed, embarrassed at being caught staring. "No, I was just thinking how strange it is that we're married, that you're my husband." A smile tugged at his lips. "Is that disappointment I hear, Mrs. Barrett?" "Not at all," she assured him quickly. "It's just that when I imagined my wedding day it was different. I imagine it was," he said softly, the teasing note gone from his voice. "I'm sorry it couldn't be what you dreamed of." "Don't be," she said honestly. "You've given me something far more valuable than a fancy wedding. You've given my child a name and me a second chance." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and for a moment, Abigail thought he might kiss her again. But then he looked away, clearing his throat. "It's getting late," he said. "You should rest. It's been a long day." They prepared for bed in awkward politeness, each retreating to their separate bedrooms. Abigail changed into her nightgown, acutely aware that only a thin wall separated her from Ethan. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the creaks and settlings of their new home, she wondered what he was thinking, what he was feeling about the strange commitment they had made. Was he regretting his impulsive offer? Or was he, like her, finding unexpected comfort in their arrangement? Sleep eluded her for hours as her mind turned over these questions. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with Ethan's blue eyes and the gentle pressure of his lips against hers. The days that followed established a routine for the newlyweds. Abigail continued teaching while Ethan worked at the livery stable. They shared meals, conversations, and the small daily tasks of maintaining a household. To the outside world, they appeared to be a contented young couple eagerly awaiting their first child. In private, they maintained a careful distance, each respectful of the boundaries they had established. Yet Abigail found herself increasingly aware of Ethan's presence, the sound of his footsteps, the timbre of his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. A month into their marriage, as summer heat gave way to the first hints of autumn, Abigail was startled awake one night by a sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped, her hands flying to her swollen belly. "Ethan," she called out, fear making her voice tremble. He appeared in her doorway almost instantly, his hair tousled from sleep. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Pain," she managed, wincing as another spasm gripped her. "Something's wrong with the baby." In moments, he was at her side, his hand covering hers on her belly. "I'm getting the doctor," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Can you hold on?" She nodded, fighting back tears of fear. "Please hurry." Ethan dressed hastily and raced into the night. Left alone, Abigail prayed fervently for her unborn child, terror gripping her heart as the pains continued to come. It seemed an eternity before Ethan returned with Dr. Simmons, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and capable hands. "Let's have a look at you, Mrs. Barrett," the doctor said calmly, approaching her bedside. Ethan retreated to the doorway, his face pale with worry. "Should I wait outside?" "Stay," Abigail pleaded, reaching for his hand. "Please." He moved to her side immediately, taking her outstretched hand in both of his. "I'm right here," he assured her. "I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Simmons examined her carefully, his expression serious but not alarmed. "The baby seems fine," he finally announced. "Strong heartbeat, good position. What you're experiencing is false labor, your body practicing for the real thing." It's not uncommon, especially in first pregnancies. Relief washed over Abigail. So the baby is all right, perfectly all right, the doctor confirmed. But you need rest, Mrs. Barrett. No more teaching until after the birth. Doctor's orders. But the school, she began to protest. Can find a temporary replacement, Ethan interrupted firmly. The baby comes first, Abby. The doctor nodded approvingly. Your husband's right. Best to be cautious. I'll check on you again tomorrow, but for now, try to sleep. He packed up his bag and headed for the door. Good night, folks. Try not to worry too much. These things happen. After the doctor left, Abigail expected Ethan to return to his own room. Instead, he pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down, still holding her hand. What are you doing? She asked. Keeping an eye on you, he replied simply. In case the pains come back. You don't have to, I want to, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Now get some sleep. I'll be right here. Abigail wanted to protest further, but exhaustion overtook her. As she drifted off, she felt Ethan's thumb tracing soothing circles on the back of her hand. And the last thing she remembered was the tender concern in his blue eyes as he watched over her. When she woke the next morning, he was still there, slumped awkwardly in the chair, his head resting against the wall, his hand still loosely holding hers. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating his face in repose, younger in sleep, vulnerable in a way he never allowed himself to be when awake. Something shifted in Abigail's heart as she watched him, a realization dawning slowly but undeniably. The feelings growing within her for this man were no longer part of their charade. Somewhere along the way, she had begun to care for Ethan Barrett, truly care for him, not just as her protector or the father in name only of her child, but as a man she could genuinely love. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Their arrangement had clear boundaries and a predetermined end. Allowing real feelings to develop could only lead to heartache when the time came to part ways. Yet as Ethan stirred, his blue eyes opening to find hers, the smile that spread across his face made her heart skip a beat. Morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. How are you feeling? Better, she replied honestly. No more pains. Good, he stretched, grimacing as his stiff muscles protested the night spent in the chair. Hungry, I could make breakfast. You don't have to take care of me, she protested weakly. His expression softened. Maybe I want to. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. True to Dr. Simmons' orders, Abigail reluctantly gave up teaching for the remainder of her pregnancy. The school board hired a young woman from the next town over as a temporary replacement, with the understanding that Abigail would return after the baby was born and a suitable period of recovery. Without the daily routine of the schoolhouse, Abigail focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny garments, arranged and rearranged the nursery corner of her bedroom, and spent hours in quiet conversation with the child growing beneath her heart. Ethan, meanwhile, had proven surprisingly adept at his new profession. Mr. Davis, the livery owner, had taken a shine to him, impressed by his work ethic and his extensive knowledge of horses. There was talk of a partnership in the future if things continued well. As autumn deepened, their home took on a more settled feel. Curtains appeared at the windows, a braided rug warmed the parlor floor, and wildflowers regularly filled the vase on the kitchen table, small touches that transformed the house into a home. Their relationship, too, evolved in subtle ways. The careful distance they had maintained began to diminish. Hands would brush while passing dishes at dinner. Conversations stretched late into the evening as they shared stories from their pasts and hopes for the future. Occasionally, Ethan would rest his hand on Abigail's expanding belly, his expression one of wonder when he felt the baby kick. Neither spoke of the growing closeness between them, as if naming it might somehow break the spell. But Abigail found herself watching the calendar with increasing dread, counting the weeks until the baby's arrival, not because she feared motherhood, but because it would mark the beginning of the end of their arrangement. One crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Abigail finally gave voice to the question that had been haunting her. "What happens after?" she asked softly. Ethan turned to look at her, his expression questioning. After the baby comes," she clarified. "Our agreement was that you would stay until then, that I would be a respectable widow or divorcee with a legitimate child." She couldn't quite keep the tremor from her voice. "Is that still the plan?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the horizon where the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. "Is that what you want?" he finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I asked you first," she countered, heart pounding. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "When I made that offer, it seemed simple. Help you out of a bad situation, move on when the time was right." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But things aren't so simple anymore, are they?" "What do you mean?" she pressed, needing him to be the first to say it. He turned to her fully then, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I mean that somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like an arrangement to me, Abby. It started feeling like," he hesitated, "like a real marriage." Hope bloomed in her chest, but she tamped it down, needing to be sure. "Because of the baby?" "No," he said firmly. "Because of you. Because I've come to care for you in a way I never expected." A wry smile touched his lips. "Turns out pretending to love someone can lead to the real thing if you're not careful." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "Ethan, are you saying—" "I'm saying I love you, Abigail Barrett," he interrupted, taking her hands in his. "And if you'll have me, I'd like this marriage to be real, not just for the baby's sake, but for ours." Joy washed over her, so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. Afraid you still saw this as temporary." "Nothing temporary about the way I feel," he assured her, drawing her gently into his arms. "I want to be your husband, truly your husband, and a father to this child, if you'll let me." In answer, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that held all the love and longing she'd been keeping at bay for months. He responded with equal fervor, his arms tightening around her, mindful of her belly between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes, Mrs. Barrett?" "Yes," she laughed through her tears. "That's definitely a yes." That night, for the first time, they shared a bed as true husband and wife, their bodies finding a tender communion that sealed their spoken vows with physical promise. As Abigail drifted toward sleep in Ethan's arms, she marveled at the strange path that had brought them to this moment of perfect happiness. 2 weeks later, in the pre-dawn hours of a frosty November morning, Abigail woke to the unmistakable onset of labor. This time, there was no mistaking the real thing for practice pains. "Ethan," she gasped, shaking his shoulder. "It's time." He was instantly alert, helping her through the first contractions while simultaneously pulling on his clothes and preparing to fetch the doctor. Before he left, he pressed a fervent kiss to her forehead. "I love you," he said fiercely. "Both of you, I'll be right back." The labor was long and difficult. Through the pain and exhaustion, Abigail was aware of Ethan's unwavering presence, wiping her brow, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement when her strength faltered. "You're the strongest woman I know," he told her as another contraction gripped her. "You can do this, Abby, just a little longer." Shortly before noon, with a final tremendous effort, Abigail brought their child into the world. The baby's lusty cry filled the room, and Dr. Simmons smiled broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Barrett," he announced. "You have a fine, healthy son." Tears streamed down Abigail's face as the doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms. She looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the perfect miniature fingers, and felt her heart expand with a love so profound it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Ethan sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, his eyes fixed on the baby in wonder. "He's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold your son?" Abigail asked, smiling through her tears. Ethan hesitated only briefly before carefully taking the swaddled infant in his strong, work-roughened hands. The baby quieted almost immediately, as if sensing the safety of his father's embrace. "Hello, son," Ethan said softly. "I'm your pa." The simple declaration brought fresh tears to Abigail's eyes. This man, who had stepped into her life at her darkest moment and offered salvation, was now embracing fatherhood with the same wholehearted commitment he had shown in every aspect of their life together. "What shall we name him?" she asked. Ethan looked thoughtful. "What about Thomas? After my father, Thomas Barrett." Abigail tested the name, smiling. "I like it. Thomas Ethan Barrett." "Perfect," Ethan agreed, his eyes suspiciously bright as he gazed down at their son. "Welcome to the world, Thomas Ethan Barrett. You're one lucky little fellow, you know that. You've got the best ma a boy could ask for. And the best pa," Abigail added softly. News of the birth spread quickly through Genoa. Within days, a steady stream of visitors arrived bearing gifts, food, and good wishes for the new parents. Even Mrs. Peterson came, with Lucy in tow, bringing a casserole and awkward congratulations. "He's beautiful," Lucy declared, peering into the cradle at the sleeping infant. "Can I hold him when he wakes up?" "Of course you can," Abigail assured her. "You'll be one of his first friends." As autumn gave way to winter, the Barrett household settled into a new routine centered around young Thomas. Abigail marveled at how naturally Ethan took to fatherhood, changing nappies, walking the floor with a colicky baby, singing old trail songs as lullabies in his surprisingly melodious baritone. One snowy evening in December, as they sat before the fire with Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Ethan reached for Abigail's hand. "I've been thinking," he began. "A dangerous pastime," she teased. He smiled, squeezing her fingers. "Davis is offering me a partnership in the livery. Says he's getting too old to run the place alone and his son's not interested in taking over." "That's wonderful news," Abigail said warmly. "You've more than earned it." "There's more," Ethan continued. "There's a piece of land for sale just outside town. 20 acres with a creek running through it. Good grazing land." Abigail studied his face, seeing the dream taking shape in his eyes. "You want to buy it," he nodded. "Build a proper house for us. Maybe start breeding horses. Not a big operation, just enough to give us a good living and something to pass on to Thomas someday." He looked at her uncertainly. "What do you think?" "I think it sounds perfect," she said honestly. "A real home for our family." Relief and happiness spread across his features. "Our family," he repeated, savoring the words. "You know, when I rode into Genoa that day, I never imagined I'd find everything I never knew I wanted." "And what's that?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. His eyes, warm with love, held hers steadily. "A home, a purpose. Someone to love who loves me back." His gaze drifted to the sleeping infant. "And a son to raise right, to be a better man than I ever was." "You're already a good man, Ethan Barrett," Abigail said firmly. "The best man I know." He drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Only because you believed I could be." As snow fell softly outside their window, Cocooning their small home in peaceful white, Abigail reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. From scandal and desperation to love and family in less than a year. From strangers to spouses to soulmates. "Penny for your thoughts," Ethan murmured against her hair. "I was just thinking about that day you rode into town," she replied. "How close I came to losing everything and how you saved me with a simple lie." "Best lie I ever told," he said, chuckling. "Though it turned out to be the truth in the end, didn't it? That baby was my future, just like I said. You both were." "And now?" she asked, tilting her face up to his eyes, blue as the summer sky, crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at her. "Now, Mrs. Barrett, we build that future together, one day at a time." As his lips met hers in a tender kiss, Abigail felt a contentment she had never thought possible. Outside, Genoa might still whisper about the schoolteacher who had found herself in trouble and the cowboy who had claimed her child as his own. But here, within these walls, they knew the truth of their love story, how a chance encounter had led to a marriage of convenience that had blossomed into the deepest of bonds. And in the cradle by the fire, their son slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge even in his infant dreams that he was loved, wanted, and the truest beginning of his parents' shared future. In the years that followed, the Barrett family thrived. Ethan's partnership in the livery expanded to ownership when old Mr. Davis finally retired. The 20 acres outside town became a successful horse breeding operation, known throughout Nebraska for producing some of the finest riding horses in the state. Abigail returned to teaching after Thomas's birth, balancing motherhood and her profession with grace. When a second child, a daughter they named Catherine, after Ethan's sister arrived 2 years later, she reduced her hours but never gave up the classroom entirely, believing too strongly in the importance of education. As for Thomas, he grew into a strong, kind-hearted boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's thoughtful nature. Though he never knew the unconventional circumstances of his parents' marriage, he understood from their example what true love looked like: steadfast, supportive, and enduring. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Ethan and Abigail would sit on the porch of the home they had built together and marvel at the strange and wonderful path that had brought them to each other. "Remember when they mocked me for being unmarried with child?" Abigail would sometimes ask, her head resting against her husband's shoulder, and Ethan would always smile, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And I said you were carrying my future." His arm would tighten around her. "Turns out I was right all along."